Most of us are fortunate enough to see those plans through. Our lives follow a familiar, comforting rhythm of seasons, milestones, and homecomings. But for a select few, the path diverges, leading them away from these quiet streets and into the harsh, unforgiving landscapes of a world at war. They are drawn by a sense of duty, a call to service that most of us will never fully comprehend. They willingly trade the comforts of home for the crucible of conflict, placing themselves between the world they love and the dangers that threaten it. They live a life of constant departure, always with the promise of an eventual return. This is a story about that promise. It's a story about the vast, immeasurable distance between a peaceful life in the American heartland and a firefight in the mountains of Afghanistan. It is the story of a man who mastered one of the most difficult professions on earth, yet never lost sight of the simple life he was fighting to come home to. He stood on the final precipice, just weeks away from closing the chapter of the warrior and beginning the chapter of the husband. This is the story of David J. Warsen, and the deafening silence left behind when the promise of a homecoming is broken forever. To truly understand the man, you must first understand the place that shaped him. David John Warsen was born on the 1st of July, 1985 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. In the latter part of the 20th century, Grand Rapids was a city built on a foundation of hard work and quiet faith. Once known as the Furniture City for its dominance in fine woodworking, it was a place where craftsmanship and dedication were woven into the cultural fabric. The community, with its strong Dutch heritage, valued family, church, and a certain stoic resilience. It was a place where you were known not by your boasts, but by your actions. David grew up in the suburb of Kentwood, a sprawling middle-class community where life revolved around familiar pillars: school, church, and, perhaps most importantly, sports. In the Midwest, high school sports are not merely an extracurricular activity. They are a central organizing principle of community life. The Friday night lights of the football stadium or the roar of the crowd in the basketball gym are where young men and women first learn the lessons of discipline, teamwork, and how to perform under pressure. It was in this environment that David's character first began to take shape. He was a product of this soil, grounded, hard-working, and instilled with a sense of belonging to something larger than himself. His generation came of age in what now feels like a different era. The 1990s were a time of relative peace and prosperity for the United States. The Cold War was over, and the nation's attention was turned inward. For a boy growing up in Michigan, the great global conflicts felt like distant history, stories from his parents' or grandparents' generations. But as David entered East Kentwood High School, the world was about to pivot on its axis. On a clear September morning in 2001, when David was a 16-year-old sophomore, 2 planes struck the World Trade Center. Another hit the Pentagon. A 4th went down in a field in Pennsylvania. The 9/11 attacks didn't just change American foreign policy. They fundamentally rewired the nation's psyche. The sense of security that had defined David's childhood evaporated in an instant. A new, unfamiliar era began, the global war on terror. Patriotism, which had been a quiet, background hum, became a loud, insistent roar. American flags appeared on every overpass, and the language of good versus evil dominated the airwaves. For a generation of young men who were just beginning to think about their place in the world, the call to service became deeply personal and intensely urgent. This new reality was amplified by a culture that was simultaneously rediscovering and mythologizing its warriors. Films like Ridley Scott's Black Hawk Down, released just months after 9/11, gave audiences a visceral, street-level view of modern combat. The film's depiction of the elite Army Rangers and Delta Force operators created a new archetype of the American soldier, highly trained, technologically advanced, and possessing an almost superhuman level of courage and resilience. This image was reinforced by the burgeoning popularity of realistic military video games, which put a virtual M4 rifle in the hands of millions of teenage boys. The shadowy world of special operations was brought into the mainstream, and the men who inhabited it, the Green Berets, the Army Rangers, and the most elite of all, the Navy SEALs, were elevated to the status of modern-day legends. It was this powerful cultural current that David Warsen and his peers were swimming in as they graduated high school and faced the defining choices of their young lives. Long before he ever dreamed of wearing a Navy Trident, David's identity was forged on the soccer pitch. At East Kentwood High School, he was a standout player, known for his relentless work ethic and natural athletic gifts. Coaches and teammates remember a young man who led by example. He wasn't necessarily the most vocal player on the field, but he was often the hardest working. His determination, a quiet force that lifted the performance of everyone around him. He played with a tenacity that belied his easygoing, friendly demeanor off the field. This wasn't just a game to him, it was a craft, one that required discipline, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to his team. This dedication earned him a spot on the soccer team at Aquinas College, a small liberal arts school in his hometown of Grand Rapids. Here, he continued to hone his skills, balancing the demands of being a collegiate athlete with his academic studies. On the surface, his life was following a well-trodden and promising path. He was a talented athlete getting a good education in the town he grew up in. A future in business, coaching, or any number of stable, comfortable professions seemed well within his reach. But the world outside the chalk lines of the soccer field was exerting a powerful pull. The stories of the war in Afghanistan and Iraq were a constant presence on the news, and the image of the special operator, the quiet professional operating at the tip of the spear, had taken root in the national consciousness and in David's. The pivotal moment, the one that would irrevocably alter the course of his life, came not from a headline or a movie, but from a conversation with a friend. A close friend had made the extraordinary decision to enlist in the Navy with the singular goal of attempting to become a SEAL. It was a goal so audacious that to most people it would seem impossible. The physical and mental requirements were legendary, the attrition rate famously high. But for David, his friend's ambition was not a deterrent. It was an inspiration. He began his own research, diving deep into the world of naval special warfare. He read about the history of the teams, from the underwater demolition teams of World War II to the modern-day operators hunting terrorists in the Hindu Kush. He learned about the brutal reality of BDS, basic underwater demolition SEAL training. He discovered a world where the teamwork he had learned on the soccer field was a matter of life and death, where the physical pain he had pushed through in training was nothing compared to the suffering candidates were expected to endure. And in this world of extreme hardship and unwavering commitment, David saw a reflection of the man he wanted to be. He saw the ultimate test of his character, a challenge that would demand every ounce of his physical and mental strength. The structured, predictable world of college and career paths suddenly seemed small. A deeper, more profound sense of purpose had taken hold. In March of 2009, at the age of 23, David Warsen made his choice. He enlisted in the Navy, trading his soccer cleats for combat boots, and set his sights on Coronado, California, and the legendary crucible that forges Navy SEALs. There is a reason why the Navy SEALs are considered among the most elite fighting forces in the world, and that reason is BUDS. It is more than a training program. It is a 6-month-long scientific experiment designed to discover the absolute limits of human potential. It is a process of elimination that weeds out the merely strong and leaves only those with an almost supernatural combination of physical endurance, mental resilience, and an unbreakable will. When David arrived in Coronado, he was plunged into this unforgiving world. The training begins with first phase, a 7-week grinder designed to break the body. The days are a relentless cycle of running in the soft, energy-sapping sand, endless push-ups and pull-ups, and navigating punishing obstacle courses, all while being screamed at by a cadre of seasoned SEAL instructors whose job is to find your breaking point. The Pacific Ocean becomes a tool of torture. Trainees are ordered into the frigid surf for hours, a process known as surf torture, until their bodies are racked with uncontrollable shivering. They are taught that their personal comfort is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the mission and the man next to them. It is here that the individual athlete begins to die and the member of a team is born. They are organized into boat crews, and the 6-ton telephone poles they are forced to carry on their shoulders, known as log PT, become a brutal lesson in coordinated teamwork. If one man falters, the entire team pays the price. The apex of first phase and the heart of the entire Bud S experience is Hell Week. It is 5.5 days of continuous, unimaginable hardship. The week begins on a Sunday night with a chaotic simulation of a combat zone, complete with explosions and machine gun fire. And from that moment until the following Friday, the trainees will not stop. They are constantly in motion, running, paddling inflatable boats on the open ocean, and performing endless calisthenics. They are perpetually cold, wet, and covered in a gritty layer of sand that chafes every inch of their skin. And most critically, they are systematically deprived of sleep, getting a total of perhaps 4 hours over the entire week. This sleep deprivation is the true test. The body begins to break down. Muscles scream in protest, joints ache, and the skin develops open sores from the constant friction of wet clothes and sand. But the mind is where the real battle is fought. Trainees begin to hallucinate. The line between reality and nightmare blurs. The simple act of putting one foot in front of the other becomes a monumental struggle of will. The instructors offer a constant, seductive way out. Just ring the bell. A brass bell hangs in the center of the training compound. Any trainee who wants to quit at any time can simply walk up and ring it 3 times. It is a sound that signifies the end of the pain, but also the end of the dream. During Hell Week, the bell rings often. Men who were star athletes and hometown heroes find their limit and give up. David Warsen did not. He and the dwindling number of men in Class 279 found something deep within themselves, a reservoir of strength they never knew they possessed. They learned the single most important lesson of a SEAL. When you think you are completely exhausted, when you believe you have nothing left to give, you are actually only at 40% of your true capacity. Those who survived Hell Week moved on to second phase, the combat diving phase. Here, the challenge shifted from raw physical endurance to mental discipline and grace under pressure. David learned to use sophisticated underwater breathing apparatus, mastering the art of stealthy, clandestine movement through the water. He was subjected to intense high-stakes emergency drills, where instructors would tie his breathing hoses in knots or rip his mask off in the dark, murky water at the bottom of a pool, training him to remain calm and methodical in a situation where the natural instinct is to panic. Finally came third phase, land warfare. The trainees are flown to San Clemente Island, a desolate piece of rock off the California coast, where they are taught the tools of their trade. They learn to handle explosives, becoming experts in demolition. They spend countless hours on the firing range, mastering every weapon in the SEAL arsenal, until marksmanship becomes second nature. They learn the intricate arts of small unit tactics, patrolling, and reconnaissance. This is where all the pieces come together, where the survivors of Bud S are transformed from resilient candidates into lethal operators. In March of 2010, after a year of relentless effort and unimaginable sacrifice, David Warsen stood on the graduation grinder in Coronado. He, along with a few men of Class 279 who had made it all the way through, was called forward. An instructor pinned the gold seal Trident onto his uniform. It is a deceptively simple emblem, a golden eagle clutching a Navy anchor, a trident, and a flintlock pistol. But it is arguably the most difficult military badge in the world to earn. In that moment, David had achieved his goal. He was now a member of one of the most exclusive and respected brotherhoods on earth, assigned to SEAL Team 3. To wear the Trident is to live a life of paradox. On one hand, you are a finely honed weapon of war, capable of operating in the most hostile environments imaginable. On the other, you are still a son, a friend, a partner. The greatest challenge for many SEALs is navigating the gulf between these two worlds. David Warsen, by all accounts, navigated it with grace. When he was with his team, he was the consummate professional, dedicated and focused. But when he was home, he was simply David. His friends and family remember a man who was humble about his accomplishments, who rarely spoke of his work. He was still the warm, engaging young man from Grand Rapids with the infectious smile. It was in this period that his life took on a new, beautiful dimension. He met Karlyn, and the two fell deeply in love. Their relationship provided an essential anchor for David, a connection to a world of peace and normalcy that was the very reason he served. A life in the SEAL teams is incredibly hard on relationships. The long, unpredictable deployments, the secrecy surrounding the work, and the constant, unspoken fear of loss can strain even the strongest bonds. But David and Karlyn built a relationship founded on deep trust, love, and a shared vision for the future. That future began to take concrete shape when David proposed. The promise of a life together after his military service was no longer an abstract dream. It was a plan. They began to meticulously organize their wedding. They set a date, December 8th, 2012. That date became a focal point, a lighthouse guiding him through the dark waters of his next deployment. Every grueling training exercise, every lonely night far from home, was now endurable because it was one step closer to that day, one step closer to coming home to Karlyn and beginning the life they had so carefully planned. In December of 2011, Petty Officer 2nd Class David Warsen and his platoon from SEAL Team 3 deployed to Afghanistan. By this time, the war had been raging for a full decade. The initial swift victory over the Taliban in 2001 had given way to a grinding, complex counterinsurgency campaign. Kandahar province in the south of the country was the spiritual birthplace of the Taliban and remained one of the most violent and contested regions. It was here that David and his team were sent to conduct special operations, targeting key insurgent leaders and disrupting their networks. The work was incredibly dangerous, typically carried out under the cover of darkness. Night after night, they would launch from their forward operating base on helicopter raids, fast roping into hostile compounds, never knowing what lay behind the next door. For 8 months, David operated at this relentless tempo, serving with distinction and courage, all while counting down the days to his return and to his wedding. By August of 2012, his deployment was nearing its end. He was just weeks away from getting on a plane and flying home for good. August 16th, 2012. In the context of a decade-long war, it was just another Thursday. But on the ground in the Maiwan district of Kandahar, it was a day of violent purpose. David and a combined force of American and Afghan commandos were tasked with a critical mission. They boarded a UH-60 Blackhawk helicopter for transport to their objective. For the men inside, the rhythmic thump of the rotor blades was a familiar sound, the soundtrack of their war. But this familiar routine was fraught with a danger that every operator in Afghanistan understood intimately. The year before, in August 2011, a Chinook helicopter with the call sign Extortion 17 had been shot down in the Tangi Valley, killing all 38 people on board, including 17 Navy SEALs, many from the elite SEAL Team 6. That single incident was the deadliest day in the history of U.S. naval special warfare. The lesson was brutal and clear. The enemy was adapting, and helicopters, for all their strength, were vulnerable. Every time they lifted off, the men inside knew they were a prime target for the rocket-propelled grenades, or RPGs, that had become a ubiquitous weapon of the insurgency. As David's Black Hawk flew low over the rugged, sun-baked terrain, that known danger became a sudden, catastrophic reality. An insurgent on the ground, waiting in ambush, raised an RPG launcher to his shoulder, tracked the helicopter, and fired. The projectile streaked through the air and found its mark. The resulting explosion ripped through the aircraft, sending it plummeting to the earth. The crash was violent and final. All 11 men on board, David, his fellow SEAL Patrick Feeks, 5 other American service members, and 4 of their Afghan partners, were killed instantly. The news of the crash traveled like a shockwave. In an instant, David Warsen, the elite warrior, the beloved son, the devoted fiancé, was gone. The meticulous plans for a wedding in December were erased. The future he and Karlyn had dreamed of was reduced to ashes and twisted metal in a remote corner of Afghanistan. He was just 27 years old. When a warrior falls in a foreign land, their final journey home is one of solemn ceremony and profound sadness. But when David Warsen's body was returned to Michigan, his homecoming transcended military ritual. It became a powerful, spontaneous expression of a community's grief and gratitude. As the hearse carrying his remains traveled from the airport to the funeral home, something remarkable happened. Thousands of ordinary citizens, people who had never met David but who understood the magnitude of his sacrifice, poured out onto the streets. They lined the procession route for miles, standing in silent tribute. They held American flags, placed their hands over their hearts, and watched as their fallen son was brought home one last time. It was a stunning display of unity, a community wrapping its arms around a family that had lost everything. His funeral at Mars Hill Bible Church was an event that brought the entire region to a standstill. The church, which can hold thousands, was overflowing. It was filled with his heartbroken family and his fiancée, Karlyn. It was filled with his SEAL brothers, their faces etched with a grief that only fellow warriors can know. And it was filled with hundreds upon hundreds of everyday people, teachers, mechanics, nurses, and farmers, who felt compelled to pay their respects. They came to mourn not just a soldier, but a symbol of the very best of their community. They wept for the loss of a young man who had once been a local soccer star and had grown up to become a national hero. The service painted a full portrait of the man they had lost. They heard stories of his courage and professionalism from his military commanders, but they also heard stories of his infectious laugh, his unwavering loyalty as a friend, and his deep and abiding love for his family and fiancée. In that church, the abstract cost of a distant war became painfully, heartbreakingly real. It was not a number on a screen or a talking point on the news. It was the empty seat in a church pew. the ghost of a wedding that would never happen, and the immense, unfillable void in the hearts of those who loved him. In the wake of such a devastating loss, a question lingers in the silence. What is left behind? What is the legacy of a life cut so tragically short? For David Warsen, the legacy is powerful and multifaceted. Officially, it is etched in the annals of military history. He was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star with Valor for his heroic service and the Purple Heart. These medals are the nation's formal grateful acknowledgement of his sacrifice. In Coronado, California, his name is carved into the black granite of the Naval Special Warfare Memorial, alongside the names of all the other frogmen who have made the ultimate sacrifice since World War II. It is a hallowed place where his brothers can come to remember him, to touch his name, and to ensure that the memory of his courage is passed down to every new generation of SEALs. He has become part of the immortal story of the teams. His life was a testament to the idea that some must be willing to stand in the darkest places so that others can live in the light. His sacrifice ensures that young men and women in places like Kentwood, Michigan, have the freedom to chase their own dreams, to plan their own weddings, to live their lives in peace. He stood on the line between those two worlds and held it for as long as he could. David Warsen's story is a profound tragedy, a painful narrative of a future lost. But it is also an enduring story of love, of courage, and of a service so profound that it continues to echo long after the warrior has fallen. If you found this helpful, smash the like button, comment below, and hit subscribe for more great content coming your way soon.